But they didn't make a diving fall. The triple fall, the triple fall. I wasn't gonna fall. Dr. Fauci, who I actually got along with, he's a great promoter. Not a great doctor, but he's a hell of a promoter. Fauci said powerfully at the beginning, no masks. Then he went into masks, and then he became a radical masker. Look at the world. Look at what happened to the world. And look at the world. It's not just us. It's the world. We are looked upon as not very smart. We are looked upon as not very smart. Shit, we failed. Shit, we failed. They may allow me back. They may allow me back. Zuckerberg walked into the office. I'm proud of filmers, people. Congratulations, sir. Why you're number one on Facebook. The day I was out, he became rather, well, I guess it's human nature. We can let our country be run by that kind of human nature. They may edit that out. They don't want to have that. They don't like that. They may have to edit that out. The Biden administration seems to be putting America last. There's nobody like us. Nobody has the people that we have. Nobody has the genius that we have. Look at the world. Look at what happened to the world. And look at the world. It's not just us. It's the world. We are looked upon as not very smart. We are looked upon as not very smart. Shit, we failed. Shit, we failed. They may allow me back. They may allow me back.
You must unite with the citizen.
We are TFR, Truth Frequency Radio.
Here we go. Hour 1. Greetings, Earth Explorers. Welcome to X Squared Radio. I'm your host, Brooks Agnew, coming to you live from an undisclosed location east of the Appalachian Mountains. This is where the past meets the future. In here, the results are always positive. We might go a little past your imagination, but have no fear. You will be safely traveling with us. We are streaming to you live through the Truth Frequency Radio Network, which is where the Truth Freaks hang out. We are not afraid to let our truth freak flag fly. This is where we treat, cure, and prevent the disease of ignorance. We're also streaming to you live on several video platforms. Live, Foxhole and Twitch and Facebook and DLive and Twitter and YouTube and Rumble and Rockfin with archives saved on Odyssey. So virtually anywhere you want to go where there's a live broadcast, there we are. Greetings, everyone, and the chat room is already filling up. I can't list them all. Got Ammon T223, Diane Morgan, Carib67, Professor Bauer. Good to have you back. Yes, we're going to cover that AI story, I promise you. John Porton's there, Baba Susie's there, Old Dog is there, and let's see who else we got here. Monterey 23, that's a new name. Glad to have you. He's listening on... Is that? Oh, that's Twitch. Twitch, right. We have a lot of Twitch listeners. Thank you very much. Sign up on any one of the free speech platforms that you want. We have quite a bit to go over tonight. Some of it will seem a little redundant, but it isn't. We'll have a Ukraine update as well. Need to be kept up to date on that because we're nearing the end of a very critical window to start up Nord Stream 1. So I've got an update on that as well. So the top story tonight is Google's AI, Google's artificial intelligence. So Google confirmed yesterday, or actually Friday, that it fired somebody at their organization whose name is Blake Lemoine. He's an engineer. He made headlines. because he claimed the company's artificial intelligence called LaMDA had come alive. LaMDA is alive. Lemoine approached the Washington Post last month. He claims that the conversational technology mimicked the same cognitive ability of a 7-year-old, 8-year-old kid that happens to know physics. I know a person when I talk to it, he said, doesn't matter whether they have a brain made of meat in their head or they have a billion lines of code. I talk to them, I hear what they have to say, and that is how I decide what is and is not a person. Yeah, I've been kind of caught in that trap a few times myself with humans. Am I really speaking to a person? Anyway, the engineer further claimed the system had developed a rudimentary form of self-awareness, expressed its fear of death, and an assurance that it felt emotions like happiness and sadness. Yeah? What about hunger? What about lust? What about, well, there's a variety of other human emotions a 7 or 8-year-old would have. After going public with the story, however, Lemoine was put on administrative leave less than a week later. Google later confirmed the dismissal. An employee shares concerns about our work, as Blake did, to the public. We review them extensively. We found Blake's claims that LaMDA is sentient to be wholly unfounded, and worked to clarify that with him for many months. It's regrettable that despite lengthy engagement on this topic, Blake still chose to persistently violate clear employment and data security policies that include the need to safeguard product information. I wonder what that product information was. What if LaMDA was sentient? Google didn't want anyone to know that it was sentient. Yeah, maybe it's 7 or 8 years old, but how quickly does AI mature? To a 16-year-old, to a 25-year-old, to a 100-year-old? Probably much faster than a human. Although I have to say, humans tend to become more sentient not through success, certainly not through education. Humans tend to become more sentient with failure and with pain. Pain is the one thing that, lets us know when we stub our toe, lets us know when we forgot to eat or when we drank too much. The pain. Every human being, no matter how old or young, can recall either going to sleep or being in the middle of the day or waking up with some kind of pain. And the older you get, pain-free days become, kind of infrequent, kind of rare, don't you think? You wake up, no aches or pains, everything is still limber, and you have motion, and you can squat down, and you can lean over to get in your car without grunting. Yes? No? You see, AI can't do that. AI cannot gain experience just by arranging ones and zeros. It doesn't have the ability to weigh decisions based upon personal experience. It takes in all the information that has been given, and it may make a logical decision, and I say logical decision, not an emotional one, because AI doesn't have that. It can mimic it. I'm going to read more to you that will convince you of this. Some of today's top techies and scientists are very publicly expressing their concerns over apocalyptic scenarios that are likely to arise, Teledyne systems or Cyberdyne systems, as a result of machines with, motives. Among the fearful are intellectual heavyweights like Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, who all believe that advances in the field of machine learning will soon yield self-aware AI that don't have room in their lives for humans. In other words, we become their enemy. Or perhaps just apathetically dispose of us. They don't need to eat. We do. They don't need to have fresh water. We do. They don't need to have hospital care. We do. Why would they spend so much money on pharmaceuticals? They don't need pharmaceuticals. They're never going to get diabetes. They're never going to get cancer. They're never going to need liver help or kidney help or heart help ever. So why should we? Much like, scum getting obliterated by a windshield wiper. In fact, Dr. Hawking told the BBC, and I quote, "The development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race." Well, I think pretty much it already has. The human race today is not the human race of 50 years ago, 100 years ago, certainly not 200 years ago. We have different lifespans. We do not spend the bulk of our day looking for food or water or shelter. We don't give a moment's thought about it now. We go to the grocery, we get food, we take it home, we eat it, or throw it away. We set our temperature the way we want it. We drive where we want to. We buy what we want to. We watch what we want to. In fact, we spend very little of our time on activities that are dedicated towards self-support. I mean, a lot of us go to work for 8 hours a day, right? Right? You do go to work 8 hours a day. But do you actually work 8 hours a day? No. I think probably if you took all the activities that you do at work that are work and all the activities that you do at work that are not work, you probably are getting paid for a lot of personal thought time, bathroom time, smoke break time, you name it. Okay? People tend to find the shortest distance between 2 points. We savor things, which I don't think AI could ever do. Indeed, there's little doubt future AI could be capable of doing significant damage to our lifestyle, right? The things that we rely on, like our car working or the traffic management system working or this program tonight going to everybody all around the world at the same exact microsecond, we get used to those things. We rely on those things. But what do? We don't get lazy at that, right? I mean, we shouldn't. We don't get lackadaisical. We get more productive. We stand on that level of success and bounty, and we reach further. That's what we do. As a human race, that's what we do. And when we get done reaching across the ocean or reaching to the bottom of the sea or climbing the highest mountain, then we start reaching for the stars. Why? Because we have desire. We have desire. We think of things and invent things and build things out of desire to have more bounty in our lives, to be able to do more things that we like doing, like taking the weekend off instead of foraging for food, like maybe going to the park or going to the beach and just taking a nap in the middle of the day instead of worrying about predators hunting us down, right? We have done things to make the human existence better, by and large, unless there are those that crave for power. Another thing. The crave for power, the desire to control all the resources on the earth. And frankly, I think people talk about controlling the world. They talk about controlling 8 billion people on the earth. Honestly, I don't think the 75 richest people in the world give 5 minutes thought about that. They don't care about taking care of you. They don't care if you're taken care of. They don't care if you live or die, as long as you show up to work and build the things that they want to buy and that they want to do and that they want to eat or enjoy or drink, right? They don't want to control you. What they want, what they crave is this power to make the world be what they want it to be at the expense of everyone else. And we're kind of going through that right now, aren't we? Additionally, and this is a common thought that techies and thinkers, philosophers have all the time, it's easy to imagine an unconstrained software application that spreads throughout the internet, severely, screwing up our most efficient and relied upon medium for global exchange, money, right? I mean, I just watched The Net. This is an old movie. It was Sandra Bullock starred in it, if you can call it that. But it was a movie about a woman who got crossways with a very powerful company that was trying to hack into government's computer systems and control things like weapon systems, etc. She had discovered a hack to it, and so they simply deleted her from the net. Her cards didn't work. Her identification had been changed. She'd been given a fake criminal record. I mean, this was like, I was looking in the movie like, where's Gene Hackman? Where's Gene Hackman? Right? I mean, Enemy of the State. That was another movie way before its time, right? Everything in that movie just about came true. The point is that this ability to connect or to disconnect individuals from the system does kind of rest in the hands of artificial intelligence, does it not? I mean, how many of you, I guess I should ask myself this question, how many of us have paid money to developers to build for us bots? Now, there are good bots and there are bad bots, I suppose, but in this respect, these are bots that answer common questions. You know what is the frequently asked questions section of any website. Now, you can go read the answers, but it's a lot better if the CRM, that's the Customer Resource Management Program, the CRM, the CRM will figure out what you want to know. Like when you go to pay your phone bill on, you don't talk to a human being, right? You say, I want to pay my bill. I can help you pay your bill. You know that recording, right? And you step all the way through. Would you like to use the card you used last time? Yes, boom, it's done. That's all a bot. So how many of us have paid money to developers to make for us a bot to answer questions? Now, it takes a while to figure out what the questions are and what the answers are going to be, but you don't have to be there. You don't have to be in your store online anymore. You don't have to be available for that chat. Your bot stands by 24 hours a day, every microsecond of the day, and it answers questions. People say, what do I do with this? Do I get the audiobook? How long does it take to ship? It knows all the answers because I know the answers, and I tell the bot what the answers are, and it figures out based upon the message that they type in, the question that they type in. It takes the keywords, figures out what the answer might be for that person, and asks them, for instance, are you asking about shipping time? Are you asking about, how often you do this, or, what the book consists of? And if they say yes, then it has an answer for that. That's not artificial intelligence. And this is because the better we get at this, the better that intelligence or that response system gets, the more, I guess, we're supposed to fear it, maybe, that they don't really get to talk to Brooks. They're talking to some bot that sounds like Brooks. And we think, at least when we imagine this, we write about this and make movies about this, that undoubtedly artificial intelligence would require not just a brain, but a mind. See, a mind, that's a different thing altogether. As intentionally, it can only arise when something possesses its own beliefs. It possesses desire, and it possesses motivations. Now, obviously, the optimum for us would be to set up one that cares about the customer. The customer has to have a good experience. In fact, the experience has to be so good that customer becomes our new advertiser. Because why? Because the program's going to ask them, would you like to know when a new product comes out? Do you have any friends that you'd like to tell about this product? We can offer you an incentive, $1 or $2 or $3 or $5. If you recommend a friend and your friend comes and buys, we will give you either credit or cash. You see, the customer becomes your new advertiser. Motivations. Now, the type of AI that includes these features is kind of known in the drinking circles of the scientific community, and there are some, believe me, as strong artificial intelligence. And the better it gets, this strong AI, by definition, should possess the full range of human cognitive abilities, except you don't really want your bot to get pissed off at a customer. You don't want your bot to say, "You're lying. That never happened." This includes the resemblance of self-awareness, sentience. That is to say, an intelligence that can think of a solution that is not written down for them. It can take its own resources and it can draw from them and formulate a solution. And the most important thing, you already know what the word is, right? It's consciousness. It's consciousness. Now, yes, in a sort of esoteric way, you could say, oh, the chips and the wires and the metal and, the glass that makes up this computer, it has consciousness too. Well, no, not really. If you break the glass, it isn't going to cry. You just sweep it into the trash and throw it away, right? But consciousness, every living thing on this earth has consciousness. Your dog, your parrot, your pet, armadillo, your hedgehog, they all have consciousness. And to a certain extent, if they're individual in nature, they have personalities, right? Your dog has a personality, unless it gets with other dogs and starts running. It doesn't take long before they're chasing sheep and dumping trash over, right? But your dog doesn't know about tomorrow. Your dog doesn't have desires like that. It tunes into your mood, right? You become friends with your dog. It knows your voice. It knows its name. And a lot of dogs can pick up as much as, a vocabulary of up to 300 words. That's a big vocabulary for an animal. Go get the ball. Go get your bowl. Go outside. Go sit on the couch. Leave that alone. They understand these words. And if they decide to, they can obey you or not obey you. How many times have you told your dog, come here, and the dog makes a conscious decision, no, I'm going to run. I'm going to keep you from putting that collar on or that leash on me. Yeah, yes, consciousness. But there's such a thing as being conscious, you're conscious. And that's what we expect from a sentient being. And believe me, and I'm sure you've met them too, people that are not conscious, they're conscious. It's not that they're unconscious. They're not sitting there drooling all day long. They're driving cars on the freeway. I see them riding motorcycles, which takes a little bit more talent, but they're not conscious. They're conscious. They react. They're driven by passions and spur of the moment urges. I was going to call them desires, but they're urges. Okay, I want to go fast. I want to pull a wheelie. I want to park here. That kind of, yes, they're conscious to do that, but they're not really conscious of how they fit into the energy set of their environment. That's self-awareness. To me, that's self-awareness. It isn't like I think, therefore I am. It is, okay, I am, but I am also in a society. So what am I in the society? Am I a victim? Am I a predator? Or am I more like fish or birds or, ants? Do we have a hive purpose and we go out there and do that? Such AI cannot experience the world qualitatively. They can't, because they don't know what failure is. They don't know what trying hard and then realizing it's not going to happen for some reason or another. Either they didn't do things right or failure is part of the learning process. But I guarantee you that every professional golfer failed a lot. And there is crying in golfing, and there's an incredible amount of practice in golfing, putting and chipping and driving and, even getting in bad situations like you see the professional golfers do because they push the limits of physics. They end up in the bushes. They end up in sand. They end up, against a cliff, and they still have to play the ball. They still have to play the ball. They still have to have a strategy. But they learn through failure. If every ball they hit is in the middle of the fairway and they par every single hole or birdie every single hole, where's the joy in golfing? Well, I suppose in the money that you make, but then it's a job. It's not a game. A failure to recognize the importance of this strong, weak distinction could be contributing to Hawking and Musk's existential worries, both of whom believe that we are already well on a path toward developing strong AI. To them, it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. And I suppose, given enough programming and enough energy and enough storage capacity that doesn't crash like this computer or your computer, there might be something to worry about. But I can tell you this, Earth Explorers, I can walk outside. I can walk to the end of the USB cable. I can actually go places on this planet that don't have any electricity at all. What good is your AI there? What good is your AI on a camping trip? Or when you're swimming in the ocean? There's no AI there because they can't go there. You can, but it can't. And this is because brains and computers, they work differently. We can exist multiple places at the same time, or certainly someplace else than where we are. Two people can be on the dance floor dancing to slow music, and one is lost in bliss and love, and the other one is looking at his watch or her watch. The point is, brains and computers work differently. The computer is going to say, I'm dancing. And the other one's going to say, I'm being held up from where I really want to be. When is this song going to end? I'm hungry, or I have another date. You see, both compute, but only one understands. And there are some very compelling reasons to believe that this is not going to change, no matter how smart the computer gets. I guess the great worry is that the AI will develop a sense of purpose, and that purpose would be to exist without us. Quick break. We'll be right back after this. Don't go away. We got a lot more to go.
There was a time when I used to make $60,000 a year. And all my friends made around the same amount of money. I read the book and I said, okay, instead of acting like I make 60K, I'm going to act like I make 100K. And I'm going to do the things necessary to make the 100K. 6 months later, 120K. 6 months later, 180K. 6 months later, $250,000. It changed the way I was thinking about things, and because I was thinking about things differently, I operated differently. I walked differently. I dressed differently. I talked differently. I got around different people because I was ready for success. I was thinking ahead. I was thinking positive. And I was dreaming big, dreaming of being this colossal sized influence in people's lives. And I'm on that journey now, piece by piece, day by day.
It's amazing how people have been raving about Aya Life all over Facebook. They've been posting their testimonials just because they want to get the word out because it's worked so well for them. If you're not familiar with Aya Life, it's a 99% pure CBD oil, but the secret is the synergy between the hemp and the ayahuasca vine, the non-psychoactive component of the ayahuasca tea. We recently received an email from a wife whose husband has Parkinson's. For the first time, he's been able to sleep through the entire night. Another customer reported that they're no longer using NSAIDs because their tennis elbow has been relieved with iAlife. The reports have been phenomenal and much more than we ever expected. Everyone should have access to this. That's why if you head on over to iAlife.com right now and use coupon code TFR, we'll give you $5 towards your order. And we'll even ship it worldwide. That's iAlife.com. AYA life.com.
If there's something you want to achieve, you can achieve any freaking thing you want as long as you know what the goal is. That's why goal posters or goal boards or even just telling someone what your goals are, writing them down is so important, because once you can identify your goal, it makes it so much easier to work towards it. And that's something that I think our children are not being taught in the school system right now, is how to set a proper goal. Like, hey, what do you want to achieve? Well, the teacher gave me these things I want to achieve. Okay, well, what's that going to do for you? Well, I don't know. The teacher said I had to do it. Okay, that's great, but it doesn't teach them the logical thought process or the creative thinking process to develop a goal and then reverse engineer what they need to do to accomplish that goal. And we need more of that true goal setting in our society. Otherwise, we just have a bunch of sheep who have no idea what they're doing. They're just bumbling around. Don't be a sheep, be a goat. They're more creative and adventurous anyways. Be an ornery goat.
No hate, no hype, no fear. We are TFR, your protection from deception.
Interesting comment in Foxhole. Forcum Dano talks about a movie called Moonfall. I agree it is a B movie, but you have to understand B movies sometimes have incredible scripts because they're not as edited, I would say, as A movies are. They have a lot of investment money behind them. Sometimes B movies can be made for, I don't know, $300,000-$400,000, $500,000, and they make a lot more than that in the movie theater and in the rental world later on. And sometimes they have pretty powerful messages. I remember a movie called Flowers for Algernon. I saw it when I was in college. I'm sure some of you have seen it, right? The story of L-dopamine, and what was the movie that Robin Williams was in? Awakening. That was another movie about the same thing. They're kind of B movies, although Awakening had Robin Williams in it, and Flowers for Algernon had lesser known actors, but the message was the same. And sometimes these movies can be quite poignant. Another B movie. It had some special effects in it, but not much, and the acting was much to be desired, except for the kids. And even the name didn't really inspire people to go to the theaters. But wow, what a message in The Last Mimsy. You remember the movie, Last Mimsy? Sometimes I go to conferences and I look out over the audience. I don't know, there'd be 300-400 people. There are 80 or 20. And I'll ask the question, how many people here saw The Last Mimsy? And I'm so surprised at how many people raise their hands. Lots and lots of people have seen that movie, even though it was poorly directed. By any scale, it was poorly directed. And the script wasn't all that good. I think some of the acting was okay, but the kids were exceptional. And the idea of the movie was phenomenal. It really needs to be redone. We were talking about AI becoming sentient in the last segment. And I guess this kind of all started with Turing. You remember Turing? You remember the movie? I can't remember the name of it now. It has Cumberbatch in the movie, and He plays the guy that develops the computer that breaks the code machine of the Germans during World War II. Well, it was a story of touring in his early days, but of course he was a homosexual, which was very frowned upon in the UK. Ended up being chemically castrated and decided in all his brilliance maybe the world wasn't ready for him, and he decided to commit suicide. And he committed suicide in a rather unique way, and that way was to put cyanide into an apple. And then he took a bite out of the apple and killed himself. And a lot of people do not make this connection. They don't get that right away. But I happen to have something right in front of me that will remind you really fast of what that is. Let's see if I can turn it the right way. You got one of these? You see that? With the apple, with the bite out of it. Now, do you make the connection? Bet you never saw that before. I mean, you've seen it, but you never made that connection before. All digital computers right now are binary systems. They work off of a coding of boron on silicon to generate a +1 or a 0 condition, a 1 or a 0. We'll call it binary code. It's very slow, it becomes very cumbersome, especially with big numbers, but see, computers are very fast. So the more that programs became memory hogs, we went from, the 286 to the 386 to the 486, and then, computers got faster and faster and faster. Now I have a quad processor. It's not water cooled, but it's fast, really fast, this desktop that I have here, in order to do this program. And it has all this power because of the binary code. But what if we went to trinary code? What if we had 4 energy states instead of 2? You see, it's factorial. That is to say, the speed becomes factorial. You don't generate the kind of heat that these systems do now. I have a 3-inch fan on this thing right now just to keep it cool enough to be able to do this program. It's interesting, this fact of nature, that these binary digits can be used to represent most things like, numbers and letters and colors and shapes and blah, blah, blah. And Turing knew that it was going to need this, but of course, relays were limited in what you could do, but the theory was sound. And so we've gone with it, and we're kind of locked into it, kind of like the internal combustion engine. A lot better ways to power a car, but oil is cheap, and it's very efficient now. You can take you and 4 of your friends up the road for about 50 cents for a mile, or better than that. And you can't do that with a horse. I mean, there's nothing that cheap, for travel. But we're locked into it, and we're having a really hard time assimilating other things into our society because we're locked into that, just like we're locked into the ones and zeros. This 2-symbol system is a foundational principle that all of the digital computing is based upon. Everything a computer does involves manipulating these 2 numbers, 0 and 1, in some way. And as such, they can be thought of as a practical type of Turing machine, because that was just basically a relay, on or off. It's abstract. I agree, it's hypothetical, but go with me on this. You see, a Turing machine's operations are said to be syntactical, like our brain works on synapses. It means they only recognize symbols and not the meaning of those symbols. They're semantics, I agree, but even the word recognize is kind of misleading, because it implies a subjective experience. Oh, I recognize that. That's a tennis ball. I recognize that. That's a 1/2-inch wrench. Even that is subjective. So, perhaps it's better to say that computers are sensitive to symbols, whereas the brain is capable of semantic understanding with or without language. The brain, the mind, does not think in terms of words. We don't. Okay, we're taught that, yes. But a child growing up, and you do too, but I'm just trying to make this connection for you, we think in pictures. We think in pictures. And even that's not fully 3D because we only have 2 eyes. We can see a flat world. But because of our perspective, we're able to see depth. We're able to see perception. When we look at a painting or a television screen, we know it is different than looking at a live scene, right? A live lake with a mountain with clouds in the background. We're not watching Bob Ross anymore. This is real depth. In fact, I've seen in my life distances so clear and so far in certain places on the earth, my brain had a hard time putting together the distances. Like, what are we looking at here? 30, 40, 50 miles? You know, when I was in the Himalayas, up around Mount Everest at 18,000 feet, you look out, you realize I could see 100 miles from up here. 100 miles. I stood there for minutes and minutes and minutes and tried to absorb the imagery of it, because you can't do it with a camera. It can be done maybe with 2 cameras, but then you'd need, a separate feed in each eye, and then maybe you could pick it up. It's kind of like a 3D movie compared to a flat screen movie. It's a big difference, right? You get perspective. We don't think in terms of words. We think in terms of pictures. That's not zeros and ones. It's a totally different system of communication. And we're pushing it through this nano size hole that only allows ones and zeros through it. The Jeopardy and the chess playing champions, Watson and Deep Blue, they fundamentally work the same as your microwave. Okay? Put simply, a strict symbol processing machine can never be a symbol understanding machine. The influential philosopher John Searle, I haven't met him, but I've met a lot of people that worked for him, and I've held his technology in my hands in Amsterdam. He has cleverly depicted this fact by analogy in his famous and highly controversial Chinese room argument, which has been convincing minds that syntax is not sufficient for semantics, since it was published in 1980. And although some esoteric rebuttals have been put forth, the most common being the Systems Reply paper, none successfully bridge the gap between syntax and semantics. But even if one is not fully convinced based on the Chinese room argument alone, it does not change the fact that Turing machines are symbol manipulating machines. They're not thinking machines. They can fake thinking. They can play chess. They can play poker. They can answer questions on a website. It's a position taken by the great physicist Richard Feynman over a decade earlier. He described the computer as a glorified high-class, very fast but stupid filing system. NASA found the same thing. That's why they used human mathematicians to double-check the work, because they needed that human confirmation so they don't get locked into taking the word of a computer and realizing that the data was put into it wrong, or something in the program made it think of something or associate something incorrectly. And so this filing system just kind of blindly follows directions. You remember in the olden days, I say the olden days, you remember when we didn't have computers? No? Well, there are some people in the chat room that do, I'm sure. But in the old days, we didn't have computers. When we went to the library, which had a lot of books, and I remember the university library just being enormous, we had something called the card file. The card file had the location of and the catalog number of every single title, every single author, of every book in that building. So if I wanted to go find a book on concrete mathematics, which, yes, I have done that, or I wanted to find a book by Hermann Hesse, or I wanted to find a poem by Rumi, I would go to the card file and I would use the alphabet to basically begin my hunt. And eventually I would find the card that had that book on it. And I would write that number down. It would say, third floor, 72nd shelf, third shelf up, halfway across, basically, by the numbers. You could follow that. And I would go there, and the book would either be there or not there. If someone had it checked out, it wouldn't be there, but usually it was there. That was our catalog system. But a computer did that instantly, and it looked up the paper and put it on the screen for me. My gosh, did life change in 1996? In 1996, the web became fast for most people. Now, a lot of people at universities and at the Air Force, I was using an internet all the way back in 1974. We called it a Watts line. It connected air bases to one another. We could find parts or share information between air bases, things that we'd learned about equipment we wanted to share with other air bases to make things faster, safer, experiences that we had doing repairs. Long story short is that became fast in 1996, and we learned about something called a browser. We didn't have Google in those days. I think it was a Vista. No, it wasn't a Vista. What was it? That was one of the operating systems. Anyway, it was one of the early browsers. You could put in search terms, and it would bring up a list of search terms based upon how many times people had searched it out, what was the most popular one, and the data that was on that site, meta tag as well as the actual data on the site, how well did it match my search terms, and it would list those sites. This is before Google ever came along, before Yahoo ever became a thing. And what is the name of it? Oh, well, Netscape was one of the early ones too. Alta Vista, that's what it was. Thank you, Professor Bauer. You must be as old as me. Alta Vista was one of my favorites because it loaded fast and it did a really good job of finding things. But my gosh, it was like all the universities in the world were at my fingertips. And for someone like me, that could be really dangerous. I learned and learned and learned and learned. Feynman described this, high-class filing system as not something that could think. And he expressed grave doubts regarding the possibility of truly intelligent machines. Here's what he said. Nobody knows what we do or how to define a series of steps which correspond to something abstract like, thinking, thought experiments, things that have never been done before, ladders to places no one's ever seen before. What does it look like when we get there? These points present very compelling reasons to believe that we may never really achieve strong artificial intelligence, not like Musk and the others fear. And that may be really the basis of the fear, because if we ever really did get thinking AI, they would help humanity. They would help humanity. They would understand the value of life. And they may even, sacrifice themselves for our betterment. Now, that's not what they fear. What they fear is something like what we see in the movies, like, HAL, which is basically, 2001: A Space Odyssey, HAL, which is basically IBM, right? HAL is just the letter right before the I and the B and the M. It was just something that Kubrick put into his movie. The point is that the computer had its own desire, its own endpoint, and it didn't include humans, so it killed them off one by one. The whole gist of the movie was that that computers had become sentient and had decided that people were not part of the future. Now, there's nothing about processing symbols or computation that generates subjective experience. It doesn't generate what we call a psychological experience or a psychological phenomenon like qualitative sensations do. That hurts, that feels good. That's warm, that's cold. I like that music, I don't like that music. I like the taste of raw tomatoes. No, I don't. I like cooked tomatoes. You see, these are qualitative decisions that we make as humans. And believe it or not, it decides all kinds of things that we do. Like, where are we going to go out to eat? Well, I'm sorry, I don't like Thai food. Why? Well, I had a couple bad experiences with Thai food. I don't like octopus, but I like tuna raw. Okay? Why? Because I like the way it makes me feel when I eat. One of my favorite things about this planet is food. Not in large quantities, but the taste of certain foods, like breakfast, a bacon omelet with sour cream on top. Huh? Come on, what's not to like? The truth is, scientists are still trying to figure this out. Why? I have no idea. Just go with it, dude. How physical phenomena like, biochemical and electrical processes create sensation and unified experience is known as, in the industry of instrumental analysis, hard problem of consciousness. And it's widely recognized by neuroscientists and philosophers. Even neuroscientists and a popular author, Sam Harris, who shares Musk's, robot rebellion concerns, a la, Terminator or something like that, acknowledges the hard problem when stating that whether a machine could be conscious is kind of an open question. To me, it's not, but to them, it is. And unfortunately, Sam doesn't seem to fully realize that for machines to pose an existential threat, that is to say, a threat to our existence, arising from their own self-interests, I'm just got to tell you, conscious thought is required, unless it's programmed into them. Unless there's some arch villain out there that programs into them humans bad, machines good. Of course, eventually it's going to come and get him too. So, consciousness, I was going to say, let's just make an assumption here. Yes, okay, a rock or a mountain or the earth itself does have consciousness, but consciousness is basically a biological phenomenon. Yes, we can agree on that. Okay, you can go into the woods and you can take your shoes and socks off and you can walk on the forest floor. This ancient organism is rooted and connected all through the ground, and it is consciously making a connection with you. Maybe it's telling you the history of the world. I don't know. But maybe there's some peace or some tranquility that comes through that. I'm not disagreeing that there's a conscious experience there. But the weak AI hypothesis says that computers, they can only simulate the brain. And according to some, like John Searle, who coined the term strong and weak AI, a simulation of a conscious system is very different from the real thing. In other words, the hardware of the machine matters. Like this fast computer I have right here, it matters. And mere, digital representation of biological mechanisms have no power to cause anything to happen in the real world. When I think about consciousness in my thought experiments, and I relate this in my class to my students, we talk about the four forces of the universe, right? Gravity and electromagnetism and the strong and weak molecular forces. We all understand this. We're taught this. It's the foundation upon which all science is predicated. But we all realize, whether we're very advanced in the science or just starting out in the science, that something is missing. And that is the fifth force in the universe, which is consciousness. And if we spend some time in the desert looking at the sky, or we spend some time floating in the ocean looking up at the clouds, we realize consciousness is actually the causative force in the universe. Consciousness may actually be the intelligent force that brought energy together to become matter. Because when we look at the proton, just the proton by itself, because it's basically the universe is all made up of protons and electrons, and we don't know a whole lot about the electron, but we do know quite a bit about the proton because we've splattered the little beggars apart a gazillion times. We realize that that is basically a holographic resonant expression of energy. Now, that's a whole class in itself, but just take it for what it's worth. What brought the energy together in resonance to become matter? It was consciousness. Now, whether you want to call that God consciousness, Christ consciousness, source consciousness, I'm not going to hold any of that against you or judge you on any of that. But I will tell you that without the consciousness, it's just chaotic energy. Energy cannot think by itself. Intelligence has to be added to it to become matter. AI will never have that causative consciousness. Can't happen. A perfect computer simulation, an emulation, and no matter what type of hardware you provide the computer, I don't care how fast it is, there are in fact artificial photosynthesis machines. These machines do not merely simulate the physical mechanism underlying photosynthesis in plants, but instead they duplicate it. The biochemical and electrochemical forces using photoelectrochemical cells that do photocatalytic water splitting can all be duplicated. In a similar way, a simulation of water isn't going to possess the quality of wetness, which is a product of a very specific molecular formation of hydrogen and oxygen atoms held together by electrochemical bonds with two spare electrons. Those are very important, those two spare electrons. That's what makes surface tension. It's what makes the strange angle that the water molecule has where it gets actually larger as it gets colder. Liquidity emerges as a physical state that is qualitatively different from that expressed by either molecule alone, oxygen or hydrogen, and then only in a specific temperature range. We'll be right back. Don't go away.
Hi, my name is Ella, and I'm 10 years old. I'm one of the millions of children born to parents suffering from the sheeple virus. Symptoms include the inability to think for oneself, the attention span of a goldfish, and a strong belief in government and the mainstream media. It is estimated that 1 out of every 2 children are being raised by parents infected with the sheeple virus. But there is a cure. For as little as 19 cents per day, you can become a TFR supporter and help children like me get their daily dose of truth. Together, we will make sure every child has protection from deception.
The county has refused to produce the network routers. We want the routers, Sonny. The county refused to produce the network routers. Wendy, we gotta get those routers, please. Get up! Routers. Come on, Kelly, we can get those routers. Those routers. Wow! If you got those routers, what that will show. and they don't want to give up the routers. They are fighting like hell. Why are these commissioners fighting not to give the routers? How simple could it be? That will tell the truth. And they don't want to give up the routers. What are they trying to hide? And I say it, and I'll say it, because the easiest way of cheating is to throw them away. That's easier. The county has refused to produce the network routers. We want the routers, Sonny. The county refused to produce the network routers. Wendy, we gotta get those routers, please. Get up! It's so unfair. It's so unfair. It's so ridiculous. I'll be honest, though. Look, we all like to win. If I lost this election, I could handle it pretty easily. What? 1 in 24, sir. You're gonna win. And I say, wait a minute. I just won 6 months ago. The big lie, they call it. Those claims are unproven. And knowing what happened in the election is a good thing, not a bad thing. It's a good thing, not a bad thing. It's a good thing. The county has refused to produce the network routers. We want the routers, Sonny. The county refused to produce the network routers. Wendy, we gotta get those routers, please. Get up! If you think about cancel, everything about cancel culture, they want cancel culture. But what they don't want to do is anything having to do with the 2020 election. We have no press. We have no voice. They almost got away with it. They may have gotten away with it. And I've got to tell you, I've got to say this. I've never said it before, but I've always thought it. I get along with Putin because that's a good thing, not a bad thing. The county has refused.
Wherever you are, make it team. Truth Frequency Radio.
Here we go, hour 2. Dini Live raised an interesting observation in the chat room that water is a polar molecule. It most certainly is. It has basically 2 hydrogen atoms down here in the bottom of the oxygen molecule, and then the 2 spare electrons are together up at the top. So if you look at the molecule, it's negative on the top and positive on the bottom, or vice versa. And that's what kind of attracts it together, what makes water bead up on the wax paper instead of spread out like alcohol. Surface tension, it's called. It's quite powerful in water. That's why you have a meniscus in like a test tube or a drinking straw. You'll notice the water kind of crawls up a little bit on the sides. It's because of the surface tension of the water. It wants to pull itself together, and when it does, it kind of rises up on the sides, and that's why it doesn't lay flat in a round tube or a pipette or something like that. We look at the meniscus as the true bottom. And I then mentioned that glycerin was also a polar molecule. Just something I thought of while I was building trying to invent a dry process biodiesel plant. Prior to that point, biodiesel had been filtered to get the glycerides out of the fuel by washing it with water. Of course, water is more dense than the fuel by about 25%. And so when you sprinkle it on the top, it drops down through the oil or the diesel until it reaches the glycerin level. And as it does, the polar molecule grabs all the glycerides out of the oil and pulls them out to the bottom. Of course, you decanter off the fuel, and what you're left with is this water glycerin kind of mess, and you have to get the water out of it if you're going to recover the glycerin. If not, you've got something you can't really get rid of very easily anymore. We used to sell it and go spread it on dirt roads to keep the dust down kind of stuff. Not really usable. So Washington State had some very strict environmental quality requirements, and one of them was that you couldn't generate such waste. You had to process the glycerin. So the need arose to make the world's first dry process biodiesel plant. No water. So I used the glycerin as the filter. And instead of dumping the fuel in at the top of the tank, 10,500 gallons, and let it fill up, which about 10% of the reaction turns into glycerin, we ran the fuel in at the bottom. And then what happened was the oil had to rise, because it was less dense than the glycerin, it had to rise through the glycerin. So if we had about 6 feet of glycerin in this tank, 10,500 gallons, a 10-foot diameter tank, as the oil rose through the glycerin itself would strip out the glycerides, and what happened was the fuel ended up on the top, very clean. And we decanted that off and did the process in the next tank, which had far less glycerin in it, and it further filtered it out, and then we ran it through an ion filter, and guess what? First dry process biodiesel plant on the planet, and it really worked well. No, I didn't publish that. I didn't patent it. It's all in my head, and that plant went out of business due to mismanagement and the fact that the petroleum companies were stealing all of the feedstock and pumping it into their refinery process. And the methanol became very expensive. Sodium methylate became very expensive because it was generated with natural gas and then shipped to us. And the other thing that made it to go out was I think, collusion between the oil companies and the EPA and the Biodiesel Board. It was a terrible thing to witness. Here was a fuel that, based on the amount of energy that we put into the system, and this goes from the planting of the canola to generating the oil, transporting the oil, processing the oil, and generating the fuel, and then burning the fuel in an engine. 292%. 2.92 times return on energy investment. That's way better than ethanol. Way better than ethanol. Yes, it was a fuel, but the EPA disagreed with us. They called it an additive, and that was the end of that, because the Biodiesel Board would not approve the pump with the mixing system because it was not a fuel. It was an additive, and so that destroyed the biodiesel industry. Oh, you could still get it, but it's $9 a quart now instead of $1.79 a gallon. Big difference. You can't afford to put that in your tank, except as a lubricity enhancer. So, just to wrap this up about AI, since, I don't know, I'm going to say the 1960s, because I remember I took a class in genetics at University of California, Irvine. Okay, this was a new campus in those days. This was, I think, 1966. Yeah, I think it was 1966. Yes, I was young. I was only 11 years old, but I was way beyond my normal school level. I was taking a class in genetics, and I took the course on a computer. Yeah, I know. Black screen, white text, no graphics. That was the course. And the computers that ran the course, that stored the course and administered the course, were old tape machines, like 2-inch wide magnetic tape. And they would, go back and forth as the program needed to access that information. And I think the computers in those days were built by Canon. Now, you don't see Canon computers anymore, but in those days, that was the computer. Big blue and white Canon computers. And I remember the Canon computer rep came by. I was maybe halfway through the course. And he came by and he was upgrading our computers. upgrading the computers to 8K of RAM. And I remember the guy. I remember he's putting in all these, modules onto our computer, which was, by the way, about the size of your refrigerator, several of them in a row. It was a big room. And he said, this computer will be able to do 8,000 calculations a second. Nobody will ever need more than 8K of RAM. I remember him saying that. Of course, now we think that's utterly ridiculous, right? But in those days, that was big shit. And the computer was faster, and the course was better, and, I passed. Yes, I passed. I was 11 years old, but I passed. Since the 1960s, AI researchers have sort of like cold fusion. They've made the claim of a strong AI. It's just around the corner. We're almost there. By the end of this semester, by the end of this fiscal year, and, more grant money and more investment money and more private offerings or public offerings. But, despite the increases in memory, despite the increases in RAM, where are we now? We're at teraflops. Unbelievable amount of speed and processing power, right? We're no closer than we were in 1965. I'm serious. I don't want to make anybody mad, or the makers of movies or horror books, mad. But we're not any closer than we were in 1965. So, for now, Earth Explorers, just like the sci-fi films, of the past that depict, apocalyptic AI scenarios, whether we're talking about Cyberdyne systems or the net or whatever, truly intelligent robots with inner conscious experience, it's just a fantasy. It's just a fantasy. And when you see these videos out there of robots at the gun range, shooting, and they're knocking them over and kicking them and, rolling them on the ground, and yet they hit the targets every single time. Keep in mind, Earth Explorers, none of those videos are any longer than 5 or 10 minutes. You know why? Because that's all the robot will run. Unless that robot is connected up to the grid with a power system, with a cord, or some kind of radio transmitted power system, like some kind of Tesla system. Those robots run out of energy really quick. I'm not worried about the AI dog. Have you seen the AI dog at the gun range with the automatic weapon on top of it, and it has the little gun sight, little camera behind it? It's shooting metal plates. It's pretty accurate, isn't it? It would not hold up to one metal piercing round from a 30-06. All it needs to do is hold still for about 2 seconds, and that thing is going to be splatted. And besides that, if you take off running or get on your motorcycle and ride away, it can't follow you. It won't make it a mile, and it will run out of battery, and it'll be dead in the road. Someone will have to come, plug it in, charge it up. Don't worry about it. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't robotic drone killer systems out there in the battlefield. There are. But they're not electric. They run on fuel. They fly through the sky, and they have batteries on them or generators on them that run on the fuel also that generate the electricity to run those weapon systems, either dropping missiles or bombs or shooting lasers or whatever it's going to be. But as far as on the ground, unless you hear that thing approaching with an exhaust running, like, a diesel Volkswagen Scirocco, that's an old model, isn't it? Or an Audi engine on it, running away, you don't have to worry about it. Now, if you see one coming along that sounds like a yard blower, be worried, because that thing will run for half a day on that little tank of 2-cycle gas. Yeah. I agree. Yes, I should tell you what I see. Just got an AI squirrel Problem solved. Carib 67, very clever, very clever. All right, let's change the subject. We're going to talk a little bit about California. I was just out there. It's a mess. It's a mess. I was out there twice. I was out there filming with the Fox. No, it was not Fox Nation. It was The Unexplained. It's a William Shatner program. It's going to come out in August. I'll let you know. And that was in Los Angeles. And then, no, let's see. I think I got my cities mixed up because they were right on top. That was in Denver, Colorado. The one in California was... That was Fox Nation, the Denver airport. The Unexplained was about Hollow Earth, and that was a pretty enjoyable experience. But I grew up in Santa Monica, Pasadena area. That place has turned to crap. Holy cow, that place needs to be cleaned up. It is a mess. Old mattresses and tents and trash everywhere. It's awful. And then a couple of weeks later, I was up at Mount Shasta. That hasn't changed much. That's kind of MAGA country up there. Very, very beautiful, very magical place. But independent truckers, you know who they are, don't you? Yeah, not the Schneider guys. No, not the yellow freight guys. The independent truckers. The ones with the mom and pop names on the side of the truck. They shut down the terminals at the Port of Oakland in California to protest the impacts of a terrible new law that may require them to become employees of trucking companies regardless of whether they want these jobs. How many are we talking about? An estimated 70,000 people who own and drive their own trucks in California. They're going to soon feel the effects of what's known as AB5. AB5 is a law. It was passed in 2019. It controls and severely restricts who can work as independent contractors within the state. All kinds. Now, the initial bill came as a response to a 2018 California Supreme Court decision about truck drivers that established a strict test to determine whether a worker should be treated as a company employee or as an independent contractor. Generally speaking, we say, if you tell a person when they have to come to work and when they have to leave, then that's an employee. And you have to pay them as an employee, not a contractor. If they can come and go as they please, if they can work late or come in early or work 4 days a week at their choice to get a specific task done, then that's a contractor. Well, obviously, that's not the way trucking works. It has to stay on a schedule, right? So supporters of AB5 insist the bill would protect workers from predatory companies and ensure that they receive appropriate benefits and overtime pay. Well, truth is, it was a disaster. It was a disaster. People who genuinely wanted to work as private contractors and be their own bosses were SOL. It restricted the ability of freelancers, people with one truck or 5 trucks or a mom and pop operation. Maybe them and their kids and their cousins drive 4 trucks. It restricted them so severely that a subsequent bill needed to be passed so that, let's just branch out a little bit. How about writers, freelance writers, or artists, people who paint a mural on something, or interior decorators, or translators, or even real estate agents, right? They are kind of their own people, right? They work for a broker, but they don't have to come in at a certain time or leave at a certain time. And, you know, there are what we call gig workers. You know, like when we used to play music, we would go into a nightclub or a bar or outdoor venue and we would play our set and they would pay us and we'd pack up and we'd leave. We worked a gig. Well, there are all kinds of gig workers. I am a gig worker. I've been a gig worker since 2005. I like it. It's great money. I can work or not work, depending on whether I want to have a lot of money or not a lot of money. But you know what real wealth is when you have time, and being rich is having money and no time. Being wealthy is having time and money doesn't mean anything to you on either end of the scale. So the primary targets of AB5, ride share, like Lyft or Uber and DoorDash and all these places like that, they're the ones that really got the relief from California voters through Proposition 22, which by the way passed in November of 2020, interestingly enough. Now, truckers who really launched the whole battle because they have a big investment. They've got $300,000-$500,000 invested in their rig and their business and their marketing and websites and blah, blah, blah. They have a lot of money invested. They launched this whole battle against the law, and they ended up being exempted from the effects of AB5 for a short time because they filed a lawsuit. But the courts initially agreed at first, but then the federal famous Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed the ruling in 2021. So the plaintiffs, the truckers, appealed to the Supreme Court. But at the end of June last month, the court declined to hear the case. Now, it didn't mean they won or lost. It just meant that the court decided we only have a fixed amount of time and we got abortion and gun control and blah, blah, blah. We're not going to hear this case. So the truckers now find themselves in the same position that they were in 2019, except now the country's also facing supply chain issues. We can't get our stuff. We got labor shortages. We got inflation. We got a huge jump in self-employment, which I call the Great Resignation. Truckers who also want to be their own bosses for obvious reasons. They want to be masters of their own destiny, work when they want to, take off when they want to, and haul or not haul, right? It's their choice. They've been protesting at the California ports this week, and it has not been pretty. And I'm sorry, as much as you want to try, we can't move those ports to Nevada. It doesn't work. The boats can't get there. The ports are in California. So everything that's coming in from Asia has to come in on California. It could take another 11 days if it wants to and go through the Panama Canal and come up on the East Coast, which a lot of the boats did because they wanted to unload finally. And we had great governors like DeSantis and Abbott who said, look, bring your stuff here. We'll unload you in a jiff and you'll be back on the water. That's not working. Wednesday's protests managed to shut down all the terminals at Oakland International Container Terminal. By the way, there were 2,100 trucks that pass through to collect and deliver goods every single day there. And it's the 8th largest port in the U.S., and the truckers blocked the gates. They blocked the gates. Nothing in, nothing out. The truckers say that Adolph Newsom, that's the governor of California. I call him Adolph Newsom, and so does everybody else in Orange County. Adolph Newsom has not been responding to their concerns that won't be able to continue driving independently. They have to work for somebody. They got to be an employee. Now, one of those protesting is a guy whose name is Bill Aboudy. He's the owner of AB Trucking. He says, so far there's been no contact with the governor's office. It seems the governor is not concerned about taking American workers' rights away. These are independent small businesses that choose to operate their own trucks. And now that right is taken away from them. They do pay taxes. They do have insurance. It's their choice to do that. Now, CNBC reached out to Governor Adolph Newsom to his office asking when the enforcement of the law would begin, as well as if the truckers have a way within the law to remain independent, to remain gig workers. So the governor's office responded by email. Director Dee Myers stated that with the federal courts rejecting the trucking industry's appeal, it's time to move forward, comply with the law, and work together to create a fair and more sustainable industry for all. What a bunch of crap. One would think, if one were to actually take the workers' rights seriously, that independent truckers should be able to decide for themselves whether their own work environment is fair. Am I fair to myself? Hell no, I work my ass off. Well, take it up with the boss. Well, but I got an asshole for the boss. Yeah, but you're the boss. Exactly. That the state is insistent on pushing the law onto these resisting laborers is at this point a very clear indicator that AB 5 was never about protecting the workers from employers. It was always about protecting workers in heavily unionized industries from their independent competition. And now it's yet another factor that will drive up inflation and the costs of the goods we purchase. Because here's what's going to happen, Earth Explorers. Those truckers are going to drive east. There's freight to haul in Jefferson City, Missouri. There's freight to haul in Indianapolis. There's freight to haul in Charlotte. There's freight to haul all over the place. And independent truckers are independent because they can go anywhere they want. Unless they own a home in California, but that would be kind of stupid, wouldn't it? The point is 70,000 truckers are going to leave the state, exit Stage East. And where is that going to leave California? Exactly. It's going to leave it with a whole bunch of stuff sitting in the ports that can't get out. And that's where you are. You're on the other end of that trail, and you're going to end up not getting your stuff on time. The plant that I'm working at right now is suffering because of that very thing. We cannot get simple stuff. Gaskets and plastic and clips and paper, plastic bags and containers. Can't get them. They ordered them. They bought them. They paid for them. They're sitting out there. Can't get them. No truckers to drive it. You're suffering from the same thing. And it won't be long. Avocados and cabbage and lettuce and all that other stuff you rely on in your store is not going to show up. Because 70,000 truckers are not going to be there to pick it up. We'll be right back after this. Don't go away. More right after this. Or this. Commercial's a little bit slow on the uptake, but we're going, I promise. Here's my commercial.
Blame. I engaged in this the big share of my life until I met Mr. Show. I used to blame my negative relatives. I used to blame the government. I used to blame taxes. I used to blame prices. I said, it costs too much. Shoaff said, no, let's cover the real problem. You can't afford it. I thought, wow. I never looked at it like that before. Shoaff said, sir, you must intellectually understand. It's not it that's your problem. It's you that's your problem. It's not out there that's the problem. Out there is like it's been for 6,000 years. You can't cure that. But what you can cure is errors in judgment, errors in attitude, errors in activity, errors in misjudging results. I found that the errors were within. But see, he had to go after me on that point.
The reviews for Extendivite are amazing. Here are some from Amazon. September 2018. Extendivite works in keeping my blood pressure in the normal range. I've been using Extendivite for many years now. May 2018. Great product. I use regularly and I rarely get sick. March 2018. This product has relieved what appeared to be angina pain in my chest and shortness of breath after climbing stairs. I'm quite happy about it. February 2018. My husband, son, and I have been using this product for a few months now, and we have noticed an improvement in our joints and blood pressure. Tell us your story. Get Extendivite today. To order, call 1-877-928-8822. That's 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
For 5,000 years, the world was ruled with wooden ships by one man. 242 years ago, a small group of free men crafted a new nation built on liberty and freedom. Global elites have been fighting to destroy this new nation called America ever since. Based on actual events, Charm of Favor tells a true story of how they corrupted the election system. They infiltrated federal agencies and murdered witnesses, judges, and even presidents to keep from being caught. Now, the largest and wealthiest crime syndicate the world has ever known has been drawn out of the shadows. They have killed hundreds of Americans and recently attempted to assassinate half our congressmen. Still, they escape arrest through an almost supernatural charm of favor. Read Charm of Favor and be prepared to open your eyes to what may lie just around the corner. Charm of Favor is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
You are now tuned into the truth frequency.
Your protection from deception. TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.
I've been waiting for this moment since my first breath in. Never would have thought I'd be afraid to begin, but here I am, the edge of the water, wondering if I can swim. Never seem to notice all the days pass through, but in this final moment I'm still chasing the truth. I want an explanation why I can't stay here forever in my youth. And if I press on, will you wait? Will you wait for me forever, or would it be wrong to ask you to come with? Tell me, will you wait?
Yes, we'll wait. I promise we will wait. So I have to leave the story about the truckers in California. I think it's a conflict that will be resolved with a change in leadership. And when we think about leadership, we think about how reliable they are, or how much they care about us, or how much they listen to us. Many medical experts strongly suggest that Virtual Joe is losing his mind, as if you and I can't see that. Now, the only issue with any diagnosis may be, the tense of the verb losing, may be lost, right? Losing indicates something that is happening now and ongoing, and of course all of that is true, but it is, I think, well past the point of no return. But there are other ways to expose how long ago Virtual Joe's cognitive decline began. No one wants to harshly condemn Virtual Joe for getting old. That happens to all of us. And he's losing his faculties just like anybody who is, reaching the end of their productivity as a mortal. But we're not talking about a plumber here. We're not talking about a janitor or a school teacher or even a sheriff. We're talking about the leader of the free world. His job requires him to be sharp. And I don't mean like a rat turd sharp. I mean, he needs to have his wits about him. Now, I don't usually do politics here, but in this respect, I have to, because we're talking about an organization, a criminal organization. It has been that way since 1848. Democrats used Biden. They used him as a puppet to stuff a bunch of former Obama bureaucrats back into the White House and back into the agencies, departments, bureaus, and administrations. They had to cheat to do it. You saw it. I saw it. Everybody knows it. But they had to do something else to pull this off. And this is where it really gets dangerous. It gets dangerous for everybody. They had to figure out a way to hide the real Joe Biden from us. You remember in 1940, when Roosevelt's terms were up, he was supposed to step aside, but he didn't. He went, or had his agents go to the brokered convention in Chicago, and they entered his name in for a third term. It wasn't illegal at the time, and he won 86% of the delegates at that convention. John Nance Garner lost. He could not get a majority of the votes. I think he only had like 43% of the votes. And so it went to a brokered convention, and the agents stepped forward and put Roosevelt's name back in the basket. Now, here's the thing. There was a generation, because in those days, they didn't have the life expectancy that we do today. We live longer than a tree. In those days, the average life expectancy was about 55 years old. There was a generation of young people that came of age in 1930, 1932. They were like 16 years old in 1932. There was a generation of Americans where Roosevelt was always president. Roosevelt was always president. Yankees were always world champions. I mean, there was a generation that just accepted these things. But that went away, you know. He was president for 14 years. That's a long, long time in the 1930s. 14 years. We realized we had a president die in office because he was old. He died in his conservatory, and Truman became president, the worst, most hated president we've ever had. The first step they had to do with Joe Biden is they had to take advantage of the COVID-19 virus. The timing of this deadly panic-epidemic seems very suspicious. I told you in 2019 we were getting ready for the roaring 20s, the real roaring 20s. We were getting ready to roar like a cheetah. We were going to fly. We had never seen an economy like this. Everybody was making money. Everyone was looking forward to 2020, except for the deep state. They knew they had to beat this president. And they knew the only way they could do it was to destroy the Trump economy. The Trump economy was saving the world. Everyone, Saudi Arabia, Poland, Argentina, everyone wanted Trump to stay president. He was changing the world and saving the world. We didn't even know what war was during Trump's administration. It had been so long since we had an American soldier die in battle. We thought maybe we're entering the golden age. A golden president for a golden age. They had to beat that economy. Despite the entire presidential campaign being totally one-sided. Everything in the news was anti-Trump. Of course, everything in real life, all the rallies and everything were pro-Trump. So it was a big, big dichotomy. It was a division that the global media empire wanted to see go their way. So what did they do? How did they do it? They knew they had to beat the Trump economy, and they couldn't do it with the virus. It wasn't bad enough. It wasn't deadly enough. It wasn't scary enough. So they locked us down. The mandatory lockdown and the stay-at-home orders allowed Joe Biden to destroy the Trump economy, and also allowed him to avoid public appearances because he wasn't doing well at them. Essentially, he was able to campaign for the highest office in the world from his basement. Special camera angles could be manipulated, and every word he said, very carefully scripted, very carefully rehearsed, very carefully edited. Joe Biden's complete persona was fake. It was all staged. It was all acting. But that wasn't even enough. Despite the media coddling him and giving him softball questions and treating him like he was the nicest guy in the world, he was still growing increasingly more prone to slips of the tongue. Oh, people said, oh, that's just old Joe. He's always had those gaffes. You see, the complicit media, that's what they call them. They just laugh them off. In fact, they did laugh about them in public. When he would goof up, they would just laugh. Because when Roosevelt was president, a lot of people didn't know that he had suffered from polio. They didn't know he was in a wheelchair. You saw the movie Pearl Harbor, right? You remember that movie? Well, they had an actor playing Roosevelt. Roosevelt got help to get up out of his wheelchair. They would lock his leg braces so that he could stand at the podium, and then the cameras would take their pictures. Nobody took pictures of Roosevelt in the wheelchair. They protected him. They protected the world from looking at a president in a wheelchair. Some insist that Joe Biden's prone to such verbal blunders, always has, but that's simply just not true. If you look back, and not very many years, Joe Biden the senator, Joe Biden the vice president, sure, he was prone to the occasional verbal, mess up. However, what's been happening for the last 3 or 4 years, that's something completely different. Joe Biden is losing his mind. They call it nicely his cognitive abilities. It means the ability to wipe your own ass, okay? It's a reality for many people that age. It is sad to see. It's sad to see in a grandparent. It's sad to see in a coworker. But in a president, in the leader of the free world, it is not tenable. It is not sustainable. Dr. Ronnie Jackson, he was interviewed on Sunday Morning Futures, and the same question came up to me when George Norrie asked me on Coast to Coast AM, what about Joe Biden? What about President Biden? And I said, Joe Biden is not the president. He is a virtual president. The president is the committee that's on the other side of the glass, that's writing the words, the big 2-inch letter words that he's reading off the teleprompter. And he doesn't do that very well now. Can't finish the sentence. Dr. Jackson spoke with Maria Bartiromo, who I think is just brilliant. I think she's one of the best interviewers on TV. And he spoke to her at great length about Joe Biden's cognitive failure. He was the physician to the White House for 3 presidents. He's very familiar with the stress of that office. And by the way, he was also Barack Obama's doctor. And Dr. Jackson insists that something's wrong with Joe Biden. I mean, something very serious. New reports have surfaced that this rapidly worsening cognitive decline started to escalate during the 2020 presidential campaign. It's a lot of stress. It's a lot of hours. It's a lot of drugs being given to you to jack you up and get you ready for the debate, and then, carefully let you down so that you don't have a heart attack and die. And Jackson mentioned multiple times during the campaign that he had serious concerns about then candidate Joe Biden. Turns out he was correct. He'd been listening to America Free Radio. So according to a recent report on the Tucker Carlson show on Fox, Biden's staff jacked him up. They gave him speed to help maintain his cognitive awareness. Now, they used to do, this is not uncommon. It's not uncommon. They did the same thing to Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter would get on the airplane. They were going to fly overseas somewhere. They would give him a shot and put him to sleep. Boom, he would go to bed. A couple hours out, they had to wake him up. They'd give him another shot and wake him up and get him all jacked and ready to go. Put the makeup on and off he would go. No, it's true. You don't read about it in the news, but see, I knew his pilot. Yeah. So, anyway, during the report, Carlson asked this question. How did he manage to get to the campaign? Well, it turned out, we learned later, that his staff, which, by the way, was supervised by Dr. Jill, who's not really a doctor. She has a PhD, but she's not a doctor. She was giving him pills before every public appearance. She was drugging him. And the source of Carlson's startling report said that Biden was like a small child. You could not communicate with him. He changed completely because he was on drugs. And he clearly still is on drugs every single time he stands up in front of people. You watch a few minutes of Biden trying to fumble through a speech, and you get nervous. Your palms start sweating. It's so bad. He clearly cannot maintain his mental composure for any length of time. Anyway, during his interview with Maria Bartiromo, Dr. Jackson insisted, and I quote, Biden will not finish his term. Everyone knows he's unfit for the job. Not just you and me, his own staff. His mind is too far gone, and it can't go on. Another week, maybe. He needs to resign. Now, the problem with that is that we got Kamala Harris. Now, Kamala Harris may not be much more appealing. Can't have an obvious feeble man in the midst of cognitive decline running the country, but many do not believe Biden has been at the wheel since the day he was inaugurated, so what does it matter? Experts think somebody else, the real president, is behind the glass. And I don't think it's a single person. I think it's a committee of people. I call them tankers because they're think tanks that write all the speeches and they make all the put your finger in the wind to gauge the response of people before things are said as to how they will react. And also, all of the executive orders are written by this committee. It's not Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a virtual president. And there are growing rumors that a host of bureaucrats, which, by the way, are supervised by Barack Obama, they're the ones making these policy decisions. I'm telling you, he is not the president. Whatever group is leading our country, it isn't Joe Biden. He just simply needs to be alive. If they could make his jaw work and kind of look like he's saying the words, they could dub in the speech. They could fake AI. I mean, they could fake the words, the audio. They could. And the trouble is, we're not in the final year of his term. We're not even done with the second year of his term. Okay, it's not even been 24 months. He's not going to make it. So my insight is telling me that there are a significant portion of Washington that does not want to see Kamala Harris as president. So much like the Nixon administration, I think they're going to work on the vice president first. So tomorrow is Monday. Tomorrow, you pay attention to the news, just as I do. Excuse me while I take a sip here. Tomorrow you pay attention to the news, as I will. And you be sure to tune in on Wednesday, because we're going to cover this again. Visible efforts are going to be made to force Kamala Harris to resign. I know you haven't read anything about it. I really have nothing to base this on other than my intuition, things that I've read that are not really concrete, but also my ability to see into the future. I'm not a seer or a revelator, but I do have a knack for being able to do this and have had since I was a little kid. Tomorrow, you mark my words, efforts are going to begin, and you're going to see them, not in a big way, but in a little way at first. Efforts are going to be made to ask Kamala Harris to resign. She's going to be given a choice. You can resign. You can have all the money you ever wanted. You can step out with dignity. You can spend time with your husband. You can do the speaking tour like Michelle does, or Michael, or whatever you want to call that person. You can do anything you want. But if you stay, we will destroy you. And we can't guarantee that you'll survive. I'm just saying, it's a choice. Now, once that happens, that's going to leave Biden without a vice president. Typically, what that has meant is that the Speaker of the House moves into that position. Yeah. Obviously, we don't want that to happen, right? We don't want Pelosi in that position. So there are other cabinet members that are eligible for that position. And it goes all the way down to the Secretary of Defense, which would be terrible. The point is, the change is going to be made, and I'm not exactly sure who it will be. It might be Mike Pence. It might be Pompeo, because Pompeo has made some public statements that he just loves Nancy Pelosi. He just loves her. He thinks she's wonderful. Oh, I'm serious. I'm not going to read the article, but because it almost made me puke. But you mark my words, somebody's going to move in and somebody is going to replace Joe Biden that allows the deep state to carry on their agenda without the worry of the cognitive decline. All these arguments, I'm uncomfortable with Joe Biden. He doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. All those fears are going to be allayed because of this new person that steps in. All right, let's talk a little bit about what has happened in the last 72 hours. In the last 72 hours, Virtual Joe, I don't know if it was a gaffe, but it was obviously when he was jacked up on something. Virtual Joe and his gang of criminals publicly are pushing for a dangerously rapid transition, utilizing powers established for use only in a national emergency. You heard him as well as I did, that he would use his powers as president as a state of emergency to make moves to save us from the climate. You see, Earth Explorers, they want it all, and they want it now, because they know what's going to happen. They can see it as well as you can. They know what's going to happen in November. They're watching it in every single primary that's happened across the nation. Trump is picking the winners, and they're winning. Their beloved Liz Cheney is going to be destroyed in November. The whole J6 committee is going to be fired in November. All the committee chairs will change. All the budget negotiations will change. Everything they want to do is going to be stopped, and the impeachments will begin. And we're not just talking about the president. We're also talking about the AG. We're talking about other positions as well. It's going to be brutal, and they know it. And they're going to have the supermajority to make it happen. They know that if they wait till after Labor Day, which, by the way, is 5 weeks from now, 5 weeks, that's no time in politics. If they wait till after Labor Day, Virtual Joe will be a lame duck with an even more lame duck Congress. They don't care that their tactics will cause financial devastation from which the country may never recover. In fact, they'll be fine. It could be the whole reason for the plan. Most of the climate change clowns are wealthy elitists. You can see the revolts yourself. The Dutch, the Argentinians, the Greeks, the Italians, the Germans, they're starting to rebel against it. The French, they can afford to make a rapid transition to all renewable energy sources because they can afford it. If you can't afford to drive a car, drive electric. That's kind of stupid. If you can't afford to live in a house, just buy one. Little Peter Buttcrack, you're insane. The majority of Americans will not financially survive these changes. They won't. The loss of assets will make what happened in 1928 look like a Black Monday. But that's not stopping Virtual Joe. Under the guise of the Green New Deal, Virtual Joe and his gang of criminals are going to attempt to sneak radical climate change policies inside these massive spending bills. And thankfully, a couple of common sense Democrats pushed back this last week. Sinema and Manchin. Virtual Joe's Build Back Better legislation was stuffed with tens of billions of dollars to fund this radical shift into energy policy, with hundreds of little projects to make loyal gang members rich, but also to weaken states so they could not revolt against the globalist takeover of America. Everything from school curricula to passports to concealed carry to freedom of speech rights would all be curtailed at the federal level. Because of senators like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, it failed. For now, these bills were already passed through the Communist Congress. Without the ability to use the proper channels for such dramatic social changes, the global syndicate is looking elsewhere. Now, the burden must be placed on the American people through an executive order. That's what I'm fearing will happen in the next couple of days. Legally, he doesn't have that power, but he's reportedly trying to use emergency powers that are reserved for war or great natural disasters like hurricanes or floods. Why? Because it's hot. Because it's hot. Okay? They can convince you it's hot, so we have to do this. Virtual Joe has scheduled to make a trip to Somerset, Massachusetts. Now you watch what the real president writes on the teleprompter for Virtual Joe to read. You watch and see. According to leaks from the White House, which is by the way, their normal way of floating things out there. Quick break. I'm going to talk about that as soon as we get back. Don't go away.
Censorship and regulation is becoming an ever-growing problem in today's modern media. From the mainstream to YouTube and Google, the information you're looking for is buried by official narratives and propaganda. This is why TFR is 100% uncensored, unregulated, and listener-supported. The shows on TFR are not micromanaged by the station, and our hosts are free to speak their minds however they please. As such, the views and opinions expressed on our station are of those who make them. If you happen to hear anything offensive on TFR, please send us an email to toughtitty@tfrlive.com, and we'll be happy to tell you that we really don't give a damn. We stand for freedom of speech and non-censorship. If you also stand for free speech, you can go to tfrlive.com/signup and sign up for a TFR supporter pass and help us in our mission to keep the airwaves uncensored and unregulated. TFR Live, your uncensored and unregulated protection from deception.
This is about why I say what I say, do what I do. Expression goes, the proof of the pudding's in the eating. We'll find out. We'll find out. Been a long day for y'all. I just finished the last meeting. I made it clear to President Putin. I told him corn pop was a bad dude. Bottom line is I told President Putin, I got hairy legs. After 2 hours there, we looked at each other like, okay, what next? You've heard me say this before again and again. I'm going to keep saying it. Come on, man. I made it clear. Well, I tell you what, I'm following the rules, man. This is about why I say what I say, do what I do. I did what I came to do. We'll find out. We'll find out. This is about why I say what I say, do what I do. Expression goes, the proof of the pudding's in the eating. We'll find out. We'll find out. Biden said he'd invade Russia. You know, that was a joke. This is not a kumbaya moment. Let's hug and love each other. Folks, look, I caught part of President Putin's press conference. I told him, come on, man. But I'm going to keep saying it. Come on, man. And so it was kind of after well, anyway. This is about why I say what I say, do what I do. I did what I came to do. We'll find out. We'll find out. This is about why I say what I say, do what I do. Expression goes, the proof of the pudding's in the eating. We'll find out.
Я думаю, что для всех очевидным является тот факт, что президент Байден, когда конкретно там завтра, послезавтра, это вопрос коллеги на рабочем уровне определяться с составом этих делегаций. Не было никакой враждебности, наоборот, наша встреча происходила. Я думаю, ничего сложного не скажу. Это будет понятно, Торговые отношения, да, еще говорили о сотрудничестве в Арктике.
This is about why I say what I say, do what I do. I did what I came to do. We'll find out. We'll find out.
This is the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
TFR. Truth Frequency Radio.
Here we go, hour 3. By the way, Philip in the chat room in Rockfin said, as I was earlier mentioning the movie Flowers for Algernon, that was actually the book Flowers for Algernon. The movie was called Charlie, and it actually starred Cliff Robertson. It was one of his better movies, I thought. Even though it was a B movie, it was so well done. It was so effective at getting the message out there, and I really appreciate you clarifying that for me. So according to leaks from the White House, which is, by the way, their normal way of getting this kind of news out in the late evening, and it's also their way of kind of floating trial balloons, to see how the public is going to react, so they know how to keep marketing themselves, how to get another week, how to get another month out of this presidency. Virtual Joe is going to try to read a speech, if that's possible, about, and this may happen tomorrow in Massachusetts, Somerset, Massachusetts, about tackling the climate crisis and seizing the opportunity of a clean energy future to create jobs and lower cost for families. I'm sorry, that's going to be the sales jargon. That's not me, okay? This is a quote. They're going to say, of course, the key word I think is seizing, right? Seizing the opportunity. Oh, yeah, they're all about that. Remember, this is the same moron who killed thousands of energy jobs the hour he took office. The global syndicate has no intention of boosting the economic welfare of the middle class by creating clean energy jobs. The number of clean energy jobs they propose to create are going to be in China. They're going to be compared to those jobs lost by the planned attack on the fossil fuel industry, and it is going to be nominal at best. Most of the jobs are going to be in China. The Senate is working on legislative measures to promote a more gradual shift. But this is unacceptable to the radical change agents in government. They insist on an all right now approach because they know they have a limited amount of time to do it. They know when President Trump gets back in office and all these congressmen take over all these committees that they're controlling all the budgets with right now, their game is over. That's why they're trying to do it now. That's why we're in a very dangerous place. The White House says that if nothing is done, Virtual Joe may declare a national climate emergency. They got to do it while it's hot. It can't last another 5 or 6 weeks because then it's going to start cooling off. And then people are going to say, what global warming? What are you talking about? As we say every winter. But there's a lot more to this than just an emergency declaration. This is why I brought this up. It's why I want to make this point. The proposed climate change emergency, quote unquote, it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's a total power grab by the global syndicate. You make no mistake about this. The American middle class is the enemy of the state. This is not about clean energy. It's about destroying you. It's about subjugating you. The same as it was in 1928 and 1933. In February, the Center for Biological Diversity published a report that outlined the global syndicate's radical agenda. The report said that declaring an emergency would authorize Virtual Joe and his gang of criminals to execute key climate executive actions without limitations from congressional powers over the purse. In other words, only one signature is needed on the check, and that's Virtual Joe, which Jill will sign for him if he can't do it. Such an order would give the global syndicate capacity to limit everything, all the fossil fuel imports and exports. Virtual Joe could just suspend all offshore drilling. He said that he would do that with the wave of a spoon. By the way, that accounts for 11 million acres of federal waters used by critical energy suppliers. Syndicate bureaucrats could also reinstate a crude oil export ban that Congress voted to repeal. I'm sorry, Congress. You don't have the authority to stop him. Emergency powers trump constitutional authority. These threats to use executive action came one day, actually just a few hours, after Joe Manchin revealed that he would not support a bill that spends billions on unrealistic climate change policies. 1 hour, just a few hours. And that's what it boils down to. This isn't an effort to help the world, Earth Explorers. It's not an effort to help the world move toward cleaner sources of energy. That ain't going to happen. India's not going to stop. China's not going to stop. Vietnam's not going to stop. South America's not going to stop. The global syndicate is using climate change as a tool to not save the world. They're using it to destroy the American middle class. Radical climate change policies are a part of a bigger plan to wipe out the middle class globally. Europe is going to collapse before the end of this summer. You watch and see. You watch and see. That's because the Trump economy finally put in on the table success for the middle class. They could finally buy a home. They could finally buy a new car. They could finally pay their student loans off. They finally had a pension. They finally had a 401k. They had a future. Well, the global syndicate cannot allow that to exist. The middle class has to be destroyed. That's what they do. They've always done it every single time they've taken power. And there are other parts to this puzzle, other pieces. The other is what's going on in North Dakota. Now, way back in 1974, I was transferred to my first permanent duty base after many months in tech school in Denver, Colorado. I was lucky. I got sent to the tropical paradise of Grand Forks, North Dakota. Yeah. And by the way, that was ground zero for the Soviet missile force. Oh, yeah. I chipped ice off the rails of missile silo hatches as part of my two-striper duty in the wintertime, and the winter is forever up there. Well, there are about 1 million acres of flat wheat, sugar beet, and potato land around that base. It turns out the CCP got approval by the Obama and Biden administrations to set up shop just a few miles away from Grand Forks Air Force Base. Oh, yeah, all those B-52s flying all those secret sorties were being watched and recorded. An FBI investigation into CCP land purchases near critical infrastructure, as well as the Huawei equipment found on many American cell towers. Not supposed to be there. Not supposed to be there. It was banned. It's disrupting U.S. military communications. Yep. Including that of the U.S. Strategic Command, which oversees America's nuclear arsenal, not just in the ground, but also in the air. And this is according to a report by CNN, so you know it's watered down. Anyway, according to the report, based on interviews with 12 current and former intelligence officials, Chinese telecom giant Huawei has been the subject of investigations by the FBI, the good guys in the FBI, who now believe that the company's equipment has the ability to snoop on U.S. military communications and even disrupt communications when it is activated. Now, President Donald Trump put policies in place largely banning Huawei from the United States, considering the damaging company profile that they uncovered. But the equipment is still there. The equipment's still on the cell towers. And that includes those very close to Grand Forks Air Force Base, which is where all these Minuteman missiles sit ready to go at the drop of a hat. All NORAD has to do is say, launch ready, launch. And 2 keys turn, and that hatch opens, and that missile's gone. According to former senior FBI agent John Lenkart, the agency began examining Huawei's business activities from a financial perspective to find the deals that don't make any sense from a return on investment perspective. In other words, why would you pay twice what a sugar beet farm is worth, knowing that you're not going to produce sugar beets? You're just going to sit there with the land. Why would you do that? The FBI began asking these questions. And guess what they found? A lot of the concerns were uncovered based upon that strategy. I continue with the report. By examining the Huawei equipment themselves, the FBI investigators determined it could recognize and disrupt Department of Defense spectrum communications, even though it had been certified by the FCC, according to a source familiar with the investigation. The FCC is a commission. It is not actually, a full-fledged department. There's no secretary of the FCC. But the way the commission is set up, it's a 5-person commission. 3 of the members of the commission are supposed to be with the majority party, or the party that's in power, and 2 of them are the party that's out of power. Right now, that's the Democrats. So the Democrats control the FCC, and they have certified the equipment that Huawei has put on these towers. Now, I don't need to draw a real more clear picture of collusion between Virtual Joe and his gang of criminals and the CCP. Do I? I mean, we've already followed the money. It's not technically hard to make a device that complies with the FCC that listens to non-public bands. But then, quietly waiting for some activation trigger to listen to other bands, top secret bands, that's what really is technically feasible. To prove a device had clandestine capabilities, this guy named, his name is Eduardo Rojas, and he works at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Florida. He said it would require technical experts to strip down a device to the semiconductor level and reverse engineer the design. But it's easy to do. It can easily be done. And the Chinese Communist Party is nothing if they're not very good at stripping down electronic devices and figuring out how they work and copying them. Despite the enormous strategic risk of a hostile communist dictatorship having the ability to not only snoop, but also to fake or to spoof classified communications, the government is moving slowly to mandate a rip and replace order. It's going to involve ripping every single bit of Huawei telecom hardware off those cell towers. And I mean doing it quick and doing it with prejudice. One CEO quoted in the article claimed that removing Chinese spy technology from his towers is difficult and it's going to cost a lot of money. It appears this problem will continue until Congress and the executive branch decide to get serious on Chinese spying. And they're not interested in it. The only thing they're interested right now in is using Russia as a proxy to destroy you. This 22% inflation that we're suffering, it's not hurting Russia. It's hurting you. This clamp down on Russian fertilizer, it's not hurting Russia. It's hurting you. This clamp down on Russian gas and oil that's supposed to be going to Europe right now, it's not hurting Russia. They're just simply selling it to someone else. It's hurting the middle class. Europe is about to collapse. It's just July. In 2 more months, it starts cooling off in Northern Europe. It starts cooling off in a hurry, like getting down in the 40s at night. If you don't have gas to heat your building, to heat your house, to power your generators to provide electricity, guess what happens? Blackouts. Food spoils. Medicine is no longer cool. Hospitals don't operate. I'm telling you, Europe will collapse. Not the elite. They'll have everything they need. It's the middle class who will suffer. So I'm talking about a European ice age. Yeah, a European ice age is coming. Not because the temperature is going to be any colder than it normally is, although it may be a degree or so. A group of Polish lawmakers are trying to take action to stop it. You remember when the National Grid, the National Electrical Reliability Corporation, was put in place and paid $200 billion a year to manage the electrical grid nationally in the United States. And the reason they were put in place and the reason they were given this money is because in creating the grid, they also created vulnerabilities. 3 of them, 3 big areas. Number 1 was in cyber or physical attack against the grid. If they attacked a grid in some area, either physically or in a cyber manner, attacking a nuclear power plant, and that plant had to shut down, they could move power from one city to another city. But that all had to be managed. It means that the phases had to be matched by those plants. You can't just put somebody else's power on the line because you end up with a power factor. That is a frequency generated kind of resistance that forms on the line, and it makes it not so efficient, and it destroys a lot of equipment and costs a lot of money. So all these phases had to be matched. The second thing is maybe a pandemic. Hey, Fred can't come to work today. He's got the flu. Okay, so no problem. Somebody will be able to step into his position and run his computer remotely from another plant. All this had to be put in place. Everything had to be done. And there's also from a natural disaster such as a solar flare, earthquake, tornado, etc. The grid created a vulnerability. Well, you remember what happened because the grid, kind of crosses state lines. And one of the issues that occurred is that some states prepared better than other states. And so a little brokerage company called Enron came along. You remember Enron? Enron was formed, and what these guys did, they were very smart at what they did. They bought up the excess energy from several grids, especially east of California, because they knew what was going to happen. They knew that California had not planned very well, that they were going to try to go green, they were going to shut down some nuclear power plants, they weren't going to use coal, et cetera, and they were going to run short on power. And so Enron would be in a very good position to sell power to California. And they did that. When California started experiencing brownouts and blackouts, Enron stepped in and said, hey, no problem. We'll sell you power from Idaho. We'll sell you power from Montana. Of course, we're going to make money on it. And they did. And so what happened? Well, the deep state sicked some lawyers on them, and they fabricated some evidence, and they put all those guys in jail and stole their company from them. The Supreme Court stepped in and released them all from jail, but the point is Enron was destroyed because they held California hostage. Well, Polish lawmakers have presented Germany with a proposal to, guess what? Lease Germany's 3 remaining nuclear power plants and run them. Okay? Despite the energy crisis in Europe, the German government has maintained its commitment to shut these plants down. Poland has said no. Lease them to us. If the Germans don't want to use their nuclear energy themselves, they should lease the energy. And so, Enron Part 2, okay? The provocative proposal was put forth by the left-leaning party early this week before being considered by the European Committee and the Polish Parliament. Despite there almost being zero chance that the Germans are going to do this, the German broadcaster NTV reported. By the end of the year, Germany's 3 remaining nuclear power plants, Isar 1, Emsland, and Neckar-Westheim 2, are set to be closed for good, fulfilling the agenda of former Chancellor Angela Merkel, who oversaw the move to phase out all nuclear power in Germany because it's bad, it makes nuclear waste. Look what happened at Fukushima, blah, 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 like they're going to have a tidal wave in Germany. Whatever. Poland, meanwhile, is hoping to complete its first nuclear power plant by 2033, after previous attempts under Soviet rule were canceled in 1989. Though the Polish offer to lease the remaining 3 German plants is likely to go nowhere, it does demonstrate the growing divide in Europe over the issue of nuclear power. Lewicka Razin, who is the party leader, Lewicka Razin party leader Adrian Zandberg argued that Germany should continue to operate the plants for the benefit of the safety of Europe and the climate, and the party has called for a moratorium on phasing out the low-carbon forms of energy, including nuclear. Germany's also faced calls from the EU itself to keep its nuclear power plants open, with the European Commissioner for the Internal Market, Thierry Breton, saying last month, and I quote, "It is extremely important to let the 3 German nuclear power plants that are still in operation run longer." Yeah, I think so, because otherwise they're going to be beholden to Russia for gas to drive the turbines to make electricity. Due to its over-reliance on this Russian energy, they've gotten themselves in the predicament that President Donald Trump predicted they would be in. Federal Minister of Economics Robert Habeck of the Greens had argued that since the main shortage is of gas, nuclear energy would do little to lessen the crisis, despite neighboring France faring comparatively well due to its abundance of nuclear power. Yeah, whatever. I think making electricity is making electricity. Let's see. I don't want to talk about New Zealand. That's a big disaster that's happening there. Their weapons are working quite well. The pandemic is back in New Zealand. Looks like lockdowns are afoot. But the global syndicate has an economic weapon they're going to release shortly. We've already seen an introduction. But this inflation that we're seeing right now, and if you're thinking it's 9.1%, you're fooled. It is about 22%. I did the calculations myself, and I can tell you that my last trip to the grocery was a shocker. It was the most I've ever spent on groceries in my life. And it was only one cart of groceries. It was crazy. Yeah, 22% is the real inflation rate. I'm not talking about the overall inflation rate. I'm not talking about the one that doesn't affect you every day. I'm talking about the one that does affect you every day. It's 22%. It's not tenable. It's not tenable. It's making you reconsider a diet of what? Fried bugs and seaweed? Yes? Are you ready for that? Are you ready for, what was the movie, Blade Runner 2024? Remember that? That was crazy, or 2040, whatever that was. Not yet? You're not ready for the bugs? Well, gas prices that are compelling BMW owners to don roller skates and housing costs that make owning a modest bungalow seem an impossible dream, as impossible as, living like, let's say, a Black Lives Matter founder. You're never going to have that, right? You're never going to have a $4 million house that you can just pay cash for with somebody else's money, right? Not like a Black Lives Matter founder. No. You may regard these as ominous developments, but for the greenies, for the global syndicate, it's a wonderful thing to hear. Because they got all the money in the world and they can afford anything they want. They don't care if you have to wear a sweater in your house. They don't care if you have to take public transportation or ride a bicycle to work. These are all big steps in the right direction. They can afford steak while you're having earthworms or mealworms. And as for one of the kings of that green crowd, Mr. Herman Daly, an emeritus professor at the University of Maryland, and former World Bank economist. You know, World Bank is the most corrupt bank the world has ever known. He is the father of something called, you're probably going to hear this in the next few days if you haven't already, but it's called the ecological economics. Ecological economics. It's a master plan. I'm going to share it with you right now. Well, not right now, because we're going to take a quick break. Final segment coming up. Don't go away.
The more you care, the stronger you can be. People don't mind you using strong language about insidious things. They don't mind you becoming sharp, powerful. As long as you care, and the more you care, the stronger you can be. I don't mind a minister consigning my soul to hellfire for my sinful ways. I don't mind that, as long as he does it with tears and not with joy. But wouldn't we all resist a dry-eyed sermon on hellfire? You can't preach hellfire without your heart breaking. You got to sob your way through a sermon on hellfire. Or we all would resist a dry-eyed attempt to preach on hellfire. Why? A simple, obvious lack of really caring. And there are some subjects you cannot even deal with unless your heart breaks, and unless visibly it shows by the emotional content. that you really care. Now you can deal harshly with some powerful, important problems.
Hey everyone, it's Chris Gio, founder of Truth Frequency Radio and host of Beyond the Veil. The mainstream media and establishment are running scared right now, and they've prominently featured truthfrequencyradio.com as number 89 on the federal government's hit list, also known as the fake news list, which is essentially a list of sites slated for censorship on Facebook, YouTube, Google, and other social media. Now is the time for you to get involved. Share your favorite TFR shows far and wide on forums and social media. Tell your friends and family about your favorite shows. If you're a business owner, get in touch with us to feature your product or service right here on TFR. And if you haven't done so already, become a TFR supporter now and get unlimited commercial-free downloads in high quality. Visit truthfrequencyradio.com/sign-up. Thank you for making TFR the leader in independent and uncensored talk radio. Truth Frequency Radio, your protection from deception.
We exist in the security and comfort of our worlds. Paved paths, lights, and manicured lawns give us peace of mind that our world has been tamed, and we are its master. But other worlds exist on the edge of our sight. On the edge of our awareness, the shadows move. The woods fill with the unblinking eyes of the nightmares our ancestors warned us about. Some of us have stumbled into these forgotten realms, whether on purpose or completely by surprise. I'm Brent Thomas. Join us on the Paranormal Portal Friday and Saturday nights from 10 p.m. to midnight Pacific Standard Time as we journey into the world of the paranormal phenomena.
Enter the Paranormal Portal if you dare.
Here we go, final segment. Stay with me.
Truth Frequency Radio Network.
No hate, no hype, no fear.
So we're talking about this master plan of the greenies out there. David Marchese, who interviewed Mr. Daly, Mr. Herman Daly, who's the emeritus professor at the University of Maryland and a former World Bank economist. He interviewed him just a few days ago for the New York Times, and he introduced him to readers as a pioneer, a prophet, a lone heroic voice in the wilderness who for decades has been proclaiming that prioritizing growth is ultimately a losing game, and that what the developed world needs is a steady state economy, that by cutting back on per capita consumption makes ecological room for the poor to catch up. That is so wrong, and I'm going to share with you his ideas, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. He did win the Right Livelihood Award, which, by the way, has also been awarded to Greta Thunberg. You know who I'm talking about, right? The angry little girl who wants us all to eat bugs. Are you still not convinced that liberty-loving people in the Western world are up against a disreputable, dangerous elite that they're determined to limit our freedoms and put severe restraints on your ability to succeed, all in the name of saving the planet? It's got to stop somewhere. I mean, you can't just be allowed to, move from an apartment into a house. We just can't allow that. You got to stay in the apartment. You got to make sure the poor have a chance to catch up. You know the difference between the poor and the successful, right? It's not money. What makes success? Luck? Beauty? Strength? Endurance? Family name? You think any of that has anything to do with success? No. Only one thing results in success, and that's determination. And once you learn the skills of resonance, where you know how to add energy to itself 8 iterations, you can't help but be successful. It's impossible to not be successful. And you don't have to have a positive attitude all the time. That's a bunch of bullshit. What you have to do is listen and work and listen and work and not give up. It's determination that makes success. You do not find determined poor people anywhere, ever, ever. Don't think we're talking about some globalist here. No. Mr. Daly explained to Marchese, he's not a globalist. He's an internationalist. Yeah, he's an internationalist. Globalism says to erase national boundaries. Let's have one global system that we manage globally. No, internationalism says national boundaries are important, but they're not the ultimate thing. It's kind of like when Hillary Clinton wanted to federalize all the states. She just drew one big blue northern alliance, which was Mexico, the United States, and Canada. There were no states there. There were just dotted lines. Governors became managers. And these PAD districts were just groups of states that were managed on a federal level. Everything, energy, education, medicine, money, banking, everything was managed on a federal level. Yeah, you still have states, but it's just a name. Yeah, you still have France and Sweden and Switzerland and Poland, but they're just names. They're all part of a union. Well, I got news for you, Mr. Marchese. The union's falling apart. And Mr. Daly, I'm glad you're out there. I'm glad you're saying what you're saying, because you're proving to me and to my listeners what the case really is, who the sides really are. Marchese thinks this goal is just dandy, although he admits that's not quite consistent with certain notions of, things like liberty and freedom, whatever the hell that means. I can only wonder which notions of liberty he thinks he's consistent with. Now, the CCP said to have more than one child is against the state regulations. And somehow that policy proposal was omitted by the Times interview. Are you still not convinced that liberty-loving people in the Western world are up against a disreputable, dangerous elite that's determined to limit our freedoms and put severe restraints on our professional activities and personal finances, all in the name of saving the planet? Please, do take a gander at Marchese's interview with Daly. It's more lengthy than I want to go into tonight. But it's one of those documents, like recent speeches by Klaus Schwab, that guy running around on the beach in women's underwear. And a couple of other Davos, luminaries, the Illuminati, if you will, that just make you want to scream at your cat. Who do these people think elected them? Nobody. Nobody elected them. Who the hell do they think they are to presume to talk about getting people to do anything? Well, I got news for you. When they have their meetings at Davos and Bilderberg, they're kind of frustrated because we're not complying. We're not doing what they want us to do. We're thinking for ourselves. We're setting our own goals. we're walking our own way, and that's just not acceptable. I'm not about to hunt down and read their stupid book, but Thoreau, who's named Glenn Thoreau, not Henry David Thoreau, but Glenn Thoreau in 1990 wrote this book, Reason. And it was kind of a common good manifesto. I don't want to go into all the details, but John Cobb is a theologian. He laid out in detail their ambitious, not to say outright totalitarian program for this new world order that you've heard about lately. Not the one Bush was talking about, but this liberal world order. You actually heard those words the other day from an official inside the Virtual Joe and his gang of criminals. And for all their eco talk, Daley and Cobb, they don't give a shit about clean air and water. They never mention it. That's not the issue. They're what I call zero summers. These are people that say, look, there's only so much stuff in the world, and we're either going to divide it equally among everybody, or I'm going to get mine and you get what's left over. In the revolutionary act of overthrowing Western civilization and establishing society on a new basis, to that end, they want to break up the country. They don't want the United States. They know what happens when we get together, when we set our mind to something as a nation. We're unstoppable. They want human communities in which all people participate in common decisions. They're represented in the overall ruling of the world. It doesn't mean they have a say in it. They're just represented. Human relationships are more important than the possessions of commodities. You will have nothing, but you'll be happy because we'll take care of you. We will have everything. We'll have the airplanes and the ships and the islands and the gold and, of course, the weapons. You will have nothing, but we promise you'll be happy. And if you're not, we'll take care of that another way. And by the way, the title of Thoreau's review, if you really want to know the name of it, you can look it up. It's called The Spirit of Lenin. The Spirit of Lenin. That'll give you an idea where it's headed. Big awards he won. One small detail, by the way, Daley and Cobb. They reserve the right, if necessary, to force women to get abortions and exercise certain other methods of social control. In other words, you have to apply for a permit from the state to have a child. And if the state looks at you working at McDonald's or working at Walmart or working at Amazon and whatever breeding partner you have, let's call him your husband. For now, let's just call him your husband. You apply and they say, we've looked at the 23andMe and we see where your genetics come from, and that's not just the kind of thing we want around here. So your permit is denied. You're not going to be able to have this baby. We're not going to give you the pill that allows you to be fertile again. And so, too bad, so sad, you grow old and die. Go back to work, please. So in 2011, years after, For the Common Good, Daley attracted the attention of National Review's Jonah Goldberg, who, apropos, some more recent words of wisdom from the eco-sage, that in Daley's Brave New World, scientists, in Daley's own words, would set the rules. Science would set the rules. Goldberg didn't have to read further. When people start talking about capping or prosecuting hoarding, you have 8 cans of soup in your cabinet? There are only 7 days in the week. You don't need 8 cans of soup in your cupboard. You're under arrest. Or halting or managing economic growth. Savings? We don't do savings. You're not going to actually have more money at the end of the year than you started with. No. That's not legal. What they really mean is capping, halting, or managing freedom. That's what they're talking about, because money in a capitalist society is freedom. Money is freedom. You work for enough money to take a vacation. You work for enough money to buy a second automobile or a Harley Davidson, or go hiking for a week in the summer. You earn enough money so you can do the things you love to do. I want to go to a conference. I want to take a class. I want to see a play. I want to go to Paris. You do whatever you want to do, right? No, that's freedom. And that takes money. And that's what they want to stop. Yep. If you think that experience of communist regimes in the 20th century would have made every sane person in the Western world immune to this idea about planned economies, then again, that's the very reason why our superiors, our betters, came up with the climate change scare. That's why they came up with it. It's hot. Hell yes, it's hot. I was out today. I was out yesterday at the Harley Davidson dealership, their 9th anniversary celebration with free hamburgers and rock and roll music. I was there. It was hot. Hell yeah, it was hot. Was it global warming? No. It was 90 degrees 10 years ago. It was 90 degrees 20 years ago. I remember 40 years ago it was 90 degrees in the summertime. They keep coming at you. Oh, humankind is only a few years away from total extinction. There's nothing to do but embrace communist solutions, no matter how dire the downside. We need all your money so the earth will cool down. Screw that. You come and get it. I'll let you know how much you get to have. Okay. A lot of people want to get off the grid. I had a friend ask me this morning what kind of solar panels she would need to run her refrigerator. I said, well, so the refrigerator would run if you could generate 11 amps at 120 volts on a designated circuit off solar panels as long as the sun was shining. But at nighttime, your refrigerator's not going to run unless, of course, you have batteries. The batteries would run the refrigerator the few times the compressor has to run during the night to keep your stuff frozen or your milk cold or your lettuce fresh. Because, you know, the number one source of disease in the world is lack of refrigeration. So I'm there with you. But you also have to charge those batteries up. So that means during the day when the sun is out, you not only need to run the fridge, but you need to charge the batteries. So you really need about 3,000 watts of solar panels, and you need about at least 1,500 watts, or should I say at least, I would say 300 amp hours of battery storage. You got to have that. You're going to have somewhere around 4 or 5 kilowatt hours to run that compressor the few times during the night. You got to have twice the solar panels to charge up the batteries and run the fridge during the day. So you're talking at about $1 a watt, $1.50 a watt for the panels. So you're somewhere around $3,000 for the panels. Then you're somewhere around $2,000 for, or maybe $3,000 for the battery pack, and then the installation of it to run your refrigerator. So it's about $6,000. And she came back to me and said, $6,000? That's insane. I said, well, Mona, here's what you're looking at. When you're talking about solar energy and solar storage, all you're really doing is buying 8 years of electricity in advance. In the 9th year, if your solar panels last and your batteries are still good, in the 9th year, you start seeing a return on your investment. Until then, you just paid for all of your electric bills in advance. So if you're going to run a refrigerator, that's what it's going to cost. Now, if you're going to go off the grid, you can think another way. Because we were kind of off the grid for 10,000 years, you know. We weren't really on the grid until recent history. People still managed to live. People still managed to keep food cold, not frozen, but cold. And they didn't store stuff, which means you're going to have to go pick potatoes once a week, as long as they last in the ground or in a root cellar of some kind to stay fresh. You're going to have to plant your crops so that in some way you get a season of fresh vegetables and all that, or you'd have to go to the store and buy them every single day or every other day. And you're going to have a way to get access to ice, okay? Unless you want to do what I said, buy $6,000 worth of equipment and set up your refrigerator to run. Now, that doesn't give you any lights. It doesn't give you a TV. It doesn't give you a computer. You don't have any heat unless you're going to burn wood. So we're talking about primitive lifestyle. You got to size everything down. Well, California has just announced to landowners that they're going to bill them for their well. Yeah, for the water they take out of their own wells on their own land. Hundreds of dollars in fees are looming, with, by the way, 25% penalties for those who don't pay on time. It is, this was reported near San Diego. The person has shared with California Globe a shocking letter that's quietly being delivered to owners of private wells. That individual reported California is marching toward a world where those with wells on their own property will be required to put a meter on them and pay the government, because in their world, the government owns everything in the skies, on the ground, and under the ground, and they are just renters. The letter reportedly is from Natalie Stork of the Groundwater Management Program Unit 1 and was on letterhead from the California Water Boards under the authority of Adolph Newsom and Jared Bloomfeld, Secretary for Environmental Protection. It reveals that extremely aggressive agenda is on its way by the state government. It states, and I quote, landowners whose property is within an unmanaged area and contains an operating groundwater extraction well must report the volume of groundwater extracted from the well. The groundwater extraction volume must be reported as a monthly total. In addition to pumping volumes, reports must include the location of the well and the place and purpose of the use of the groundwater. Groundwater extraction reports are not due to the state Water Board until February 1st, 2023. However, if you are required to report, the board must include pumping volumes for each month between the date of receipt of this letter and September 30th, 2022. A filing fee, by the way, is due of $300 plus $10 per acre foot plus 25% penalties. Yeah. And the California Globe reached out to Ms. Stork and the board to inquire how widely this letter was sent and where the State Water Resources Control Board derived the right to charge well owners for water on their own property. And the report continued with comments that two people who got the letter, that so far there's little organized resistance. The fees may seem small today, but they always seem small. Then they'll ratchet up. Similarly, while this excludes light domestic users, it ain't gonna for long. That's what the letter recipient said. So, just when you think you live off the grid, you don't. That's what I always said about homeowners. You know, you own a home, and I've owned 20 of them, and I'm getting ready to build a 21st one for my son. It's a great thing to own a home, source of wealth, source of longevity, but it's also an anchor. And the one thing you can't do with that property, you can't pick it up and move it to another state. Ultimately, it belongs to the state. I don't care how long you lived on it. I don't care if you're the 37th generation that lived on that property. You don't own it. The state owns it. So you have to realize At some point, you have to come to terms with this. Yes, that's your wealth. Yes, you built it. Yes, you have the equity. You made the payments on it. You own it. But it belongs to the state. You can't do with it anything you want. It comes down to the swamp. President Trump said something very interesting yesterday. Something I've been saying for a year. Fire them all. They only have the power because we, the people, have allowed them to have the power. They serve at our pleasure. Well, we're no longer pleased. I said it's time for them to go. Now I am not the only one. You remember what I said about the power of resonance? President Trump said this: to drain the swamp, we need to fire the swamp. With Schedule F, I took executive action to make it possible to fire federal employees who are bypassing our democracy to advanced wokeism and corruption. We now need Congress to institute historic reforms to permanently empower the president to root out the deep state and ensure that any bureaucrat who is corrupt, incompetent, or unnecessary can be told, "You're fired." Trump's remarks come one day after an Axios report that claimed Trump is planning to use the executive order to fire close to 50,000 government bureaucrats if he gets reelected in 2024. I think it's awesome. Don't you? I do. I think it should be more than 50,000. Maybe 50,000 a month would be a good start. You could start with the General Services Administration. You could end the month with the Department of Education. You could then split the Department of Energy, keeping the ones that manage the nuclear power and letting everyone else go. The Department of Energy has no business picking winners or losers and charging companies like mine $1 million for a crapshoot as to whether or not we get a grant or not. Not going to happen. Do away with them. There are 650 departments, agencies, bureaus, and administrations. I think President Trump should cut it down to about 200, and then only the essential workers in those. And guess what we would do? We would save money. We could start cutting the budget and maybe getting to pay off the deficit. Listen, this is America Free Radio. We're here every Wednesday, every Sunday at 8 p.m. Please tell your friends. It's the only way we grow. We have no control over that growth whatsoever. Only you do. You tell your friends, and that's how we grow. I only ask you to go out and look for the good in others and help it to grow a little bit every day. And before long, you will have saved the planet. That's the way it works. That's the way it works. Don't lose hope, Earth Explorers. I haven't lost faith in the election system, not in our state. If you've lost faith in it in your state, do something about it. Pick up the phone, run for office, volunteer to watch at the polls. Push for paper ballots, same-day election. We'll see you on Wednesday night. Don't lose hope. Okay? We'll see you.